My name is Julia Pena, 33 years old. I had a stroke at my desk on a Tuesday, and the first thing my father said at my hospital bed was not my name. It was, "Who's paying the mortgage while you lie here?" My mother didn't ask where it hurt. She asked the doctor how soon I could be discharged, because private rooms cost money. They didn't know that I had already heard everything they said in the hallway when they thought I was asleep. Before I left that hospital, I made one quiet call, and that was the moment everything began to turn. To understand why I didn't argue, you have to go back 8 years, to the day I first mistook their interest for love. I was 25 when I got promoted the first time. Relationship associate at a private bank in Charlotte, the kind of place where the lobby smells like cold marble and every client has a last name that opens doors. I had spent 2 years being invisible there, staying late, learning the names of people who would never learn mine. And then, one afternoon, a managing director called me into his office and told me I'd earned my own book of clients. I drove straight to my parents' house that evening. I remember I was still in my work clothes, still holding the little congratulations card my team had signed. I thought, and I need you to hear how young this sounds, I thought they would be proud. I thought my mother would put the card on the refrigerator the way mothers do in the version of childhood people talk about. Maybe I invented a version of them who would do that. My father was in his recliner. My mother was at the counter, scrolling through photos of a friend's kitchen renovation. I told them about the promotion. I told them what the raise would be. My father didn't say congratulations. He said, "So what does that put you at now, a year?" I told him the number. He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he's doing math that has nothing to do with you. "That's real money," he said. "You could help out around here now. Your mother's been wanting to redo the back patio." That was it. That was the whole celebration. I stood in their kitchen holding a card signed by strangers, and my own father took my good news and found the door in it that led to his pocket. I told myself it was practical. I told myself that's just how he talked. And then I said yes to the patio. That yes was the first brick. I didn't know I was building a wall I'd spend the next 8 years standing behind. I've tried to understand where it started, the part of me that said yes so easily. I think it started young. I was the kind of child who kept the peace, who learned early that the house was calmer when I needed nothing. So I trained myself to need nothing. When I was 10, I got the highest grade in my class on a state test, and my mother's response was to ask whether I could have gotten it without showing off, because a teacher had said something about me in front of the other parents, and it had somehow embarrassed her. I remember standing in the kitchen with the paper in my hand, learning the lesson that would organize my whole life. That my achievements were only welcome when they made my parents look good, and dangerous when they drew attention I hadn't been given permission to have. So I got very good at a specific thing, being excellent quietly, being useful invisibly, turning everything I earned into something for them. By 25, I barely felt the exchange anymore. Be useful, stay quiet, and call whatever came back love. Here is how it worked, and I want to be clear about the mechanics, because for a long time even I didn't see the shape of it. My parents owned their house, a 4-bedroom in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, and a gate that didn't actually keep anyone out, but made everyone feel important. The mortgage was in their names. I was never on the loan. I want you to remember that, because it matters later. I was never legally responsible for a single dollar of it. But 3 years after that promotion, when my father restructured some things and the payment got tight, I started covering it, quietly, an automatic transfer from my account into theirs on the first of every month. $2,900 gone before I woke up. Then came the monthly allowance, because a house that nice needs a life that nice to live in it. Another $1,500, sometimes $2,000, for the club dues and the dinners, and my mother's standing appointment at a salon where they served champagne while they did your color. And then came the card. My credit was excellent. Years of being careful will do that. So I qualified for a premium travel card, the heavy metal kind that lands on a restaurant table with a sound like a verdict. My mother saw mine once and wanted her own, so I added them both as authorized users, my name on the account, their names on the plastic, every charge, mine to pay. By the time I was 30, I was funding almost the whole life they performed for other people, and almost no one knew. That was the part that took me longest to understand. It wasn't just that I paid, it was that they needed me to pay quietly so no one would know I paid. A year later, there was a party, the spring I turned 31. My mother's idea, a little get-together for 40 people in a tented backyard, the patio from that first yes under everyone's feet. I flew in from a client trip and got there late, still in travel clothes, and I stood at the edge of it watching my parents work the crowd. I heard my father tell a man near the bar, "We've just always believed in doing things ourselves. Nobody handed us anything." The man nodded, impressed. My father let him be impressed. Then my mother, a few feet away, to a circle of her friends. "Julia? Oh, you know how it is. Married to that job. We're lucky if she calls. Kids these days, they get busy and they forget where they came from." Her friends made sympathetic sounds. One of them touched my mother's arm. I was standing close enough to hear it. I had paid for the patio under their feet, the tent they were standing under, the caterer, the champagne my mother was holding, the shoes on her feet. And to that circle of women, I was the ungrateful daughter who forgot her parents. I didn't correct her. I want you to understand. I could have. I could have walked into that circle and said one true sentence and watched their faces change. But I had already learned the thing that kept me quiet for years, that being right and being loved were not the same currency, and I was starving for the second one. So I got myself a drink and I smiled, and I let my mother's version of me stand where the real one should have been. Later that same night, my father found me by the drinks table and put his arm around me, warm, expansive, a little drunk on his own performance. For 1 second I thought, there it is, that's the thing I've been waiting for. He's going to say he's proud, he's going to say thank you. He pulled me close and lowered his voice and said, "The Marlowes are thinking about switching banks. You should talk to them before they leave. Could be good for your numbers." Then he squeezed my shoulder and let go and drifted back into the party. That was the arm around me. That was the closest thing to affection I got that night. A warm hand steering me toward a sail. And the worst part, the part I'm ashamed of, is that I did it. I found the Marlowes. I talked to them. I brought them in. Because even then, even knowing exactly what the arm around my shoulder had really been, some starving part of me thought, maybe if I land this one, he'll mean it next time. Because my job kept me traveling, because I was rarely at the table, the lie was easy to believe. The daughter who was everywhere in the accounts and nowhere in the room. That was the story, and a story only needs to be plausible to become the truth. My birthday that year came and went with a text. Just a text. "Happy birthday, hun." Sent at 9 p.m. which meant it was remembered late. But on the 15th, the card statement date, my mother called me at 8 a.m. to make sure a charge had gone through before she booked the next thing. They could not remember the day I was born on time. They never forgot the day the bill was due. I noticed it. I filed it away with all the other things I noticed and didn't say. I was very good at noticing. It's a skill you develop when your worth depends on staying useful. You learn to read the weather of other people so well that you forget to check your own. And my own weather was turning. I just wasn't reading it. Buenos Aires. The headaches started that summer. I told myself it was screens, deadlines, not enough sleep. My doctor told me something else. She sat me down at a routine physical, looked at the numbers on her screen twice, and told me my blood pressure was in a range she didn't like at all. The kind of range that, in a woman my age, was a warning shot. She wanted me back in 2 weeks for a follow-up. She wanted labs. She said the words stroke risk out loud, gently, the way you'd set down something breakable. I made the follow-up appointment. Then I canceled it because my mother wanted me to drive her to look at furniture for a room she wasn't even redoing yet, and I treated wanting as needing. I rescheduled. Canceled again. A client dinner I couldn't move. The third time, the appointment fell on the afternoon of one of my parents' events, and my mother called and said, "You're coming early to help set up, right? You know I can't do the flowers alone." And I heard the doctor's voice in my head saying 2 weeks, and I heard my mother's voice saying, "The flowers," and I chose the flowers. I want you to sit with that, because I have. I chose their party over the appointment that might have slowed down the thing that was about to take half of my body away from me. That's not a metaphor. That's the choice I have had to live with. The 3 weeks before it happened are a blur of the same day repeated. A major client, old money, impossible, the kind who calls your cell at 11 at night to ask a question he could have emailed, was moving a large portfolio, and it all landed on me. I slept 4 hours, then 3. I ate standing up or not at all. I lived on coffee and those small cans of energy drink that taste like battery and citrus. One hand started going numb in the mornings. I shook it out and kept typing. The headaches came in behind my eyes like weather. I told myself, after this deal, I'll rest. I had been saying that for years. There was a night, about a week before it happened, when I stood in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, trying to open a bottle of water, and one hand wouldn't close around the cap. I stood there, exhausted past the point of fear, and I thought about calling someone. My hand hovered over the phone, and I realized, with a flat kind of horror, that there was no one I would call. Not because I had no one, but because the only 2 people I'd trained myself to answer to would want to know why I was bothering them, and whether it could wait until morning. Claire. I didn't want to worry, so I put the phone down, and I ran the cap under hot water until my fingers loosened, and I drank the water, and I went back to work. I have thought about that night a great deal. It was my body sending up a flare. And the loneliest thing I have ever felt was realizing I had built a life with no one in it to see the flare but me. My mother texted me twice that week, once to ask if I could look over a contractor's estimate, once to remind me the club renewal was coming. I answered both. Of course I answered both. It happened on a Tuesday in mid-November 2025 at 10:40 in the morning. I know the time because I was looking at the clock on my monitor when the room tilted. The right side of the clock smeared. I tried to say my colleague's name, and my mouth made a shape that wasn't a word. The last thing I remember clearly is the pattern of the carpet getting too close, and someone across the floor saying, "Call 911, call 911," in a voice that seemed very far away, and thinking, with the strange calm of a person who has finally stopped running, Oh, so this is what the doctor meant. Abrishing. I woke up in a hospital bed with the left side of my body belonging to someone else. My arm lay on the blanket like a thing I'd been asked to hold for a stranger. When I tried to speak, the words came out soft and slurred, sliding off the ends of themselves. The doctors used words like ischemic and mild for a stroke and lucky and time. They said I would likely recover most of the function with therapy. They said the next few days mattered. They said I needed to be watched. My parents came the second day. I heard them before I saw them. My mother's heels on the hospital floor, my father's voice already going, complaining about the parking. My mother came in first. She did not come to the side of the bed. She stopped at the foot of it, looked at me the way you look at a car with a flat tire, and said, "Oh, Julia, look at you." Then she turned to the nurse, adjusting my IV, and said, "How soon can she be discharged? These private rooms, my goodness, the cost." My father filled the doorway behind her. He had a folder under his arm, an actual folder. He set it on the rolling tray table, the one meant for my meals, and I saw what it was, the household bills, the ones I handled, that he must have pulled from the drawer because he didn't know where else to look. He looked at me lying there with half my face still not working, and he said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. "Who's paying the mortgage while you lie here? Not how do you feel? Not we were so scared. Not I love you. Who's paying the mortgage?" I tried to answer. I don't know why. 8 years of training doesn't switch off just because your brain has short-circuited. But the words wouldn't come out right, and I saw the flicker of impatience cross his face. Impatience at a woman who couldn't form a sentence because she'd had a stroke. And my mother said over her shoulder, "Don't tire her out, Gerald. She needs to get better so she can sort these bills out." So she can sort the bills out. That was the concern. Not that I get better, that I get better enough to keep the machine running. I closed my eyes and let them think I was resting. It was the only wall I had left, and I hid behind it. There was a nurse that morning, before my parents came, a woman about my age with tired, kind eyes and a wedding ring she wore on a chain because her fingers swelled on shift. She checked my monitors, sat on the edge of my bed for a moment she didn't have, and asked me a question so simple it undid me. "Where does it hurt, honey?" I hadn't been asked that in years. Not really. My parents asked what I could do. My clients asked what I could fix. And here was a stranger in scrubs asking the one question that assumed I was a person and not a function. I couldn't answer her the way I wanted to. My mouth wouldn't cooperate, but I looked at her, and something in my chest cracked quietly along a line that had been under pressure for a long time. Her name was on her badge, but I want to keep it for myself. What I'll tell you is that my best friend Claire came an hour later, and she asked me the same thing, in almost the same words, and that was when I understood that the question was normal, that it was the baseline, that the strange thing was not the nurse asking it. The strange thing was that the two people who made me had never thought to. Claire is a nurse herself, though not at that hospital. We met in college, and she has known every version of me, including the ones I've tried to hide. She took one look at me in that bed, and her face did something my mother's face had not done. It fell. She sat down and took my working hand and held it, and she said, okay, I'm here. Where does it hurt?" I said, slowly, wrongly, but I got it out. "Everywhere." She thought I meant my body. I let her think that. The doctor came in while Claire was there and said the thing that should have scared my parents and didn't. He said, looking at my chart, that if I went back to the life that had built these numbers, the hours, the stress, the nothing sleep, the risk of a second event would not be abstract. and the second one is rarely as kind as the first. Claire heard it. She squeezed my hand hard. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hall light came under my door in a long yellow line, and around midnight, I heard my parents' voices outside. Low, the specific low of people who think they're being private. I want to tell you exactly what I heard because that was the moment I stopped misunderstanding my life. My mother said, "The doctor's making it sound worse than it is. She's young. People bounce back." My father said, "She'd better. Do you know what the club renewal is next month? And the Hendersons invited us to Aspen." A pause. The sound of a vending machine somewhere. My mother, lower. "We just can't have her getting ideas. Lying in here with nothing to do, she starts thinking too much. We need her back on her feet and back to normal before she talks herself into some crisis about it all." My father. "She won't. She never does. As long as she's still bringing it in, she's fine, and we're fine. Just don't let her stew." As long as she's still bringing it in. I lay in that bed with a body that felt half asleep, and I listened to my parents stand 10 feet away and confirm in plain language that their concern about my stroke was not for me. It was for the interruption. Their fear was not that I might get worse. It was that I might think. I did not cry. I have thought a lot about why I didn't, and I believe it's because crying is what you do when something breaks, and nothing broke in that moment. Something set, like a bone that's been out of place so long you forgot it was supposed to align. And then, all at once, in the dark, with a sound only you can hear, it goes back to where it belongs. That was when I understood. Whatever love they had for me had been buried under what I made, and no amount of making more would ever dig it back out. I had spent 8 years trying to buy a feeling that was not for sale from people who were never going to give it freely. The next morning, I asked Claire to bring me my phone and my glasses. I didn't call my parents. I want to be precise about the order of things, because the order is the whole point. I did not confront them. I did not send a furious message. I did not give a speech. People who need a speech are still hoping to be heard. I was done hoping. I lay in that bed and I looked, for the first time in years, at the actual numbers. Not the version I ran on autopilot, the real ledger. I added it up with a thumb on a small screen because my left hand still wouldn't work. The mortgage, the allowance, the card, the little things that were never little. 8 years of it. The number was large enough that I laughed, a small, wrong, one-sided laugh, because half my face was still on strike. It wasn't the size that got me. It was the realization that this number was the exact measure of how much I had been willing to pay to be told I was enough, and that I had never once been told it, and that the balance owed on that feeling was, and always would be, unpaid. Claire watched me do the math. When I set the phone down, she said carefully, "What are you thinking?" I said, "I'm thinking I've been paying a bill that was never going to clear." And then I said, "I need to make a call." Catherine Boyle came to see me on the 4th day. Catherine was one of the clients I'd worked with longest, a woman in her 50s who had built and sold a logistics company and now spent her time being unbothered on a scale most people can't imagine. She'd heard I was out unexpectedly and asked Claire whether I was taking visitors. She showed up with no flowers, which I appreciated, because flowers die and she is not a woman who invests in dying things. She sat in the chair by my bed and looked at me for a long moment. "I did this once," she said. "Not the stroke, the other thing. The paying." She smoothed her slacks. "My mother. 20 years I kept her comfortable and myself invisible. You know what finally stopped me? Not anger, arithmetic. One day I did the math on what I'd spent buying a love that wasn't for sale, and I realized I could have retired on it. I'd been financing my own smallness." I looked at her. "You're a good banker, Julia," she said. "You know exactly what a thing is worth, except one." She tapped the blanket over my numb hand, gently. "This one. You've had it priced wrong your whole life." She didn't tell me what to do. That's the thing about Catherine. She never solved anything for me. She just held up a mirror and let me see that I'd been standing in front of it with my eyes closed. Before she left, she said, "When you're ready to work again, really work, not bleed, call me. There are better rooms than the one that put you here." I didn't know yet what she meant, but I wrote it down in the part of my mind that keeps the important things. That was the day I stopped rehearsing what I would say to my parents, because I finally understood I wasn't going to say anything at all. I made the call that Thursday, still in the hospital, from a chair by the window, with a physical therapist due in 20 minutes. I called the bank, my bank, the one whose systems I understood better than most people. The customer line, not an internal shortcut. I wanted this ordinary, logged, permanent, done by the rules. I asked them to remove 2 authorized users from my personal credit card account. I spelled the names, Gerald Pina, Doris Pina. The representative repeated them back, and I said yes, both effective immediately, and please issue no replacement cards. Then I asked them to cancel 2 recurring transfers, the first of the month, $2,900 for the mortgage. The 15th, the variable allowance that had started at $1,500 and kept growing. I said cancel, not pause. I said it twice so there would be no confusion. It took 11 minutes to end 8 years. The representative was pleasant and efficient and had no idea she was present at the most important thing I had done in 8 years. At the end, she said, "Is there anything else I can help you with today, Ms. Pena?" And I said, "No, that's everything." And it was. I did not call my parents to warn them. That was the decision, not the cancellation, the silence around it, because I knew that if I told them, we would have the conversation, and in the conversation I would soften, and in the softening I would lose. Every argument they'd ever let me have had ended with me keeping the peace by giving in. So I would not argue. I would simply stop and let the stopping speak in the language they actually understood. The physical therapist arrived. She helped me stand. My left leg trembled and held. I took 3 steps across a hospital room, and it was the first thing in years I'd done entirely for myself. I did not go back to my apartment when I was discharged. I went to Claire's. She had a small second bedroom, a couch she joked was the guest suite, and a way of feeding people that made eating feel like a kindness instead of one more task. For the first time in longer than I could measure, someone was taking care of me and asking nothing in return but that I get better. The recovery was slow and unglamorous. I want to be honest about that, because the story would be prettier if I stood up healed, and I didn't. I dropped things. I cried at commercials because the stroke had loosened something in my wiring, and grief I'd stored for a decade came out sideways at car insurance ads. I relearned the word specifically for 3 days. My left hand came back like a tide, a little more each morning, until the day I buttoned my own shirt and had to sit down from the size of it. There was a morning, maybe 10 days in, when Claire came home from a night shift and found me at her kitchen table with my laptop open, and for a second, her whole face closed because she thought I was working. She thought I'd found my way back to the machine. I turned the screen around so she could see it. It wasn't work. It was a budget, my own, for the first time in years, with the transfers gone and the card closed, and only my own life on the page. She looked at it. Then she looked at me and said, "Julia, do you know how much room you have in your own life now?" And I did. That was the strange gift of it. For years I'd lived on the edge of my own income, wealthy on paper, and stretched thin in fact. And now, with the giving stopped, I had room. Room to rest. Room to take a job that paid less. Room to be sick for a while without it being a catastrophe. I had been financing my own scarcity, exactly like Catherine said, and the second I stopped, the walls of my life moved outward and I could breathe. And in that quiet, sleeping 8 hours, eating meals that Claire put in front of me, walking a little farther each day around her block, something happened that I had not planned. I got a look at my own life from the outside, and I saw how small the cage had been, and how long I'd been the one holding the door shut from the inside. I called Catherine. She'd meant what she said. She introduced me to a boutique advisory firm where she served on the board. Smaller title, saner hours, people who thought a human being was allowed to have a body. Less money than the bank. So much less bleeding. I took it. I gave the bank my notice from Claire's couch, and when I hit send on the resignation, my hand didn't shake at all. I was building a life that could hold me. It wasn't an empire. I didn't want an empire. I wanted a Tuesday I could survive. Benny. Meanwhile, 10 miles away, my parents kept trying to live the life I'd stopped paying for. They just didn't know it yet. That's the part I couldn't have scripted if I'd tried. They noticed nothing. The card still worked in their minds because it had always worked. The transfers had always appeared, so they assumed they always would. My mother booked the salon. My father renewed something at the club. They moved through the world using credit that no longer had me behind it, still walking forward because they had not looked down. My mother called me once during this stretch, not to ask how I was, to tell me brightly, "We're doing a dinner Saturday at Astra, a downtown place with a wine list thick as a hymnal and a maitre d' who remembered the right names. The whole old crowd's coming, the Hendersons, everybody. So make sure the transfer goes through, hun. You know how they are about splitting things." Make sure the transfer goes through. I said, "Okay." That was all. One word. She heard agreement in it because agreement was all she'd ever heard from me. She did not hear the truth sitting underneath it, which was that there would be no transfer and no card, and that she had just told me exactly where and when the life they'd built on my silence would finally come due. I hung up, and I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time. I want to tell you about the night before that dinner, because I need you to know I am not made of stone. I healed enough that week to feel almost like a person. I took a walk at dusk without holding anyone's arm. I laughed at something Claire said. A real laugh from the middle of me. The kind I hadn't heard from myself in years. Contrast is a cruel teacher. You don't know how tired you were until you're not. And that night, sitting on Claire's guest bed, I picked up my phone and I almost called my mother. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't guilt about the money. It was older than that. It was the 25-year-old with the congratulations card still in there, still hoping that if she just explained it right, if she just gave one more time, the door would finally open. My thumb hovered over my mother's name. I thought, I could warn her. I could tell her, don't go Saturday or bring your own way to pay and spare her the moment. I could be, one last time, the daughter who protects them from the consequences of themselves. And then I heard the nurse's voice and Claire's voice, the same words in two mouths. Where does it hurt? I thought about how, in 8 years, no version of my parents had ever asked me that. How the moment I couldn't produce, I became an inconvenience in a room they wanted freed. How my father had looked at my broken face and seen an unpaid invoice. I set the phone down. Claire looked in from the doorway. You okay? I was about to save them, I said. She didn't say anything smart. She just came and sat next to me and let the silence be, which is its own kind of answer. I did not call. I had spent 8 years speaking to them in money. Now I would speak to them in the one language I had left, which was the absence of it. Saturday morning, my mother texted me. Tonight is important. The whole crowd will be there. Don't embarrass me. I read it twice. Don't embarrass me. From the woman who had told a circle of her friends that I forgot where I came from while standing on a patio I'd bought her. From the woman who'd asked the nurse how fast she could free the bed. Don't embarrass me. I didn't answer. I put the phone face down on Claire's kitchen table, and I made coffee, and I let the morning be quiet. I had no plan to make a scene that night. I want to be clear about that because it matters to who I am. I only knew I had stopped paying, and that consequences eventually arrive. I was not going to show up. I had done nothing at all except stop. A single, boring, 11-minute phone call 2 weeks earlier, and now the thing I'd stopped was simply going to arrive where it was always going to arrive. I spent Saturday at Claire's. We had an early dinner, the two of us. I told her about the new job, the saner hours, the way my new boss had actually said the words, "Go home at 5 o'clock," like they were nothing. It was the most ordinary evening of my life, and it felt like a miracle. 10 miles away, at a table under low gold light, my parents were performing the last act of a play they didn't know had been rewritten. I wasn't there, so I've built the next part from what they said afterward, what the voicemail gave away, and what I know about rooms like that. I know my father ordered well because he always ordered well when there was an audience. Wine, courses, the whole performance of never looking at the right side of the menu. I know he told the story he always told, the one about doing it all themselves, nobody handing them anything, because it was the only story he had, and the old crowd was the perfect church for it. I know my mother mentioned me, lightly, with a little sigh. The too busy daughter, so absent, so married to that job, and I know the table made the sounds tables make, sympathetic and a little smug, and I know for a few hours my parents sat inside the exact feeling they had spent my money for years to buy. And then the plates were cleared, and the maitre d' brought the check in its leather folder and set it down near my father, the way he'd done 100 times. My father smiled. He reached into his jacket. He took out the heavy metal card, his name on the front, my account behind it, and he laid it on the table with that small final sound, the verdict sound, in front of the whole old crowd. The waiter took it away. My father kept talking. This is the part I'm sure of, because my father could always talk through anything. The waiter came back. I have imagined his face many times, apologetic, professional, quiet. He would have leaned in the way they trained them to, so the whole table wouldn't hear. He would have said, "I'm sorry, sir, this card was declined. Do you have another?" Declined. My father would have laughed the first time. There's a specific laugh a proud man uses to wave off a small mistake. It says, "Obviously an error, obviously the machine, not me, never me." He would have said, "Run it again," and the waiter would have run it again. And it would have come back the same, because an authorized user card stops working when the account holder removes it. My mother reached into her purse. She had a card too, her own metal card, the twin of his, the one she loved to produce. She handed it over with a tight smile and a comment about how these places, honestly, they're machines. And that card went away and came back, and it was declined too, because it was never her card either. It was mine. They both were. Every piece of plastic on that table led back to one account, and 2 weeks earlier I had closed their access to it. 2 cards, same account behind both, dead at the same table, at the same moment, in front of the exact people my parents had spent a lifetime trying to impress. The phone calls started at 9:14 p.m. I know because my phone was face down on Claire's coffee table, and it began to buzz against the wood, and I turned it over and saw Dad on the screen, and I turned it back down. I didn't answer. I want you to know it wasn't triumph I felt. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of finally putting down something you've carried so long your arms forgot they were holding it. He called again at 9:16, then a text. "Julia, call me, now there's a problem with the card." Then again at 9:19. Then my mother at 9:22, her name lighting up the dark room. "Mom." I let it ring out. Claire watched me from across the room. She didn't tell me to answer. She didn't tell me not to. She just stayed, which is what she has always done. The calls came in a cluster, the way panic does. 9:24, 9:26, 9:31. A voicemail I didn't listen to until much later. My father's voice gone thin and strange. "Julia, the card's not working, both of them. And there's a whole, call me back. This is embarrassing. Call me back." This is embarrassing. Not, "I'm worried about you." Not, "Are you all right?" Embarrassing. Even now, even here, at the bottom of the thing, the wound was the same wound. The audience, always the audience. I counted them the next morning. 12 calls, 12 between 9:14 and 11:40 p.m. 12 times my parents needed me, urgently, desperately, in a way they had never needed to know whether I was all right. I answered none of them. Around 10, between the 10th call and the 11th, Claire made tea and sat across from me and asked the only question worth asking. "Are you okay?" Not the situation, me. I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I keep waiting to feel guilty," I said, "and it's not coming." She nodded like she understood, and she did, because she'd watched me carry the guilt for years the way you'd carry someone else's coat, and now the person had walked off and left it, and I was finally allowed to set it down. "That's not you turning cold," she said. "That's you turning back on." I've held on to that sentence. I slept 8 hours. My heart, when I checked it out of habit the way you do after something like a stroke, was beating slow and even and entirely my own. They came to Claire's door the next morning. I don't know how they found where I was staying. Claire thinks my mother called a mutual acquaintance. But at a little after 9, there was a knock, and through the window I saw them on the step. My father in his good coat, my mother with her arms crossed against the December cold, both of them wearing the particular expression of people who have come to fix a misunderstanding. "We need to talk," my father said when I opened the door. I let them into Claire's living room. Claire stood in the kitchen doorway, close, not hiding. I didn't ask her to leave. I wanted a witness who knew what love was supposed to look like. My mother started before she'd even sat down. "Julia, the most humiliating thing happened last night. Both cards just in front of everyone. And we've been trying to reach you for—" "I know," I said. Something in the way I said it stopped her. She looked at me. My father looked at me. And I watched the first real understanding cross their faces. Late, so late, the understanding that I already knew, that I had known before it happened, and that the stopping had been mine. "You did this," my father said. "I stopped doing it," I said. "There's a difference. For 8 years, I paid your mortgage, your allowance, your cards, your club, your lifestyle. 2 weeks ago, I stopped. That's all. I didn't take anything from you. I just stopped giving it." A hero ear. My father recovered fast, the way he always did. He sat down heavily and spread his hands, reasonable, wounded, reaching for the register that had always worked on me. "Okay," he said. "Okay. We spent more than we should have. That's on us. Your mother and I got carried away. So we'll tighten up. We'll make a plan. Just turn the cards back on, and we'll figure out paying you back what we can, and we'll be more careful. And—" "No," I said. My mother tried the other door. "Julia, I carried you. I gave birth to you. Do you understand what a mother sacrifices? And this is—" "You're apologizing for the money," I said. They both stopped. "Listen to yourselves," I said. My voice was quiet. I had learned over a long time that quiet carries further than loud in a room that's braced for shouting. You've been here 5 minutes. You've apologized for spending too much. You've apologized for the scene at the restaurant. You've offered a payment plan. I looked at my father. You have not, either of you, asked me how I am. Not once. Not where it hurts. Not what I need. The silence that came then was different from the hallway silence. That one had been theirs. This one was mine. "I had a stroke," I said. 3 weeks ago, half my body stopped working. I couldn't say my own name. And the first thing you said to me, Dad, the very first thing, before hello, before anything, was, 'Who's paying the mortgage while you lie here?'" I let it sit. "You're not sorry you didn't love me. You're sorry you lost the money. And I finally understand that those were always the same thing to you. The money was the love. There was never anything underneath it." My mother's eyes filled, but I watched them, and I want to tell you the truth, because I promised myself I always would from now on. Even then, even crying, she was calculating. I could see it. The tears were real, and the arithmetic behind them was also real, running in the background, looking for the sentence that would get the cards turned back on. "A person can make a mistake," she said. "One bad moment in a hospital, we were frightened." "It wasn't a moment," I said. "A moment I could forgive." This was 8 years of moments, monthly choices, daily choices, to see me as a bank account with a pulse. I heard you in the hallway that first night. I heard both of you. I watched that land. I watched my father's face go still. As long as she's still bringing it in, she's fine, and we're fine. You said that 10 feet from my bed, so don't tell me it was one bad moment. It was who you decided I was, over and over, for a very long time. Neither of them had an answer for that, because there wasn't one. You cannot argue with a sentence someone heard you say. My father tried anyway, because giving up was not in him. We're family, he said, and there was real bewilderment in it, which was the saddest part. He genuinely did not understand what he'd done. Family takes care of each other. You think we're the only parents who ever let a child help out? That's how it's always worked. You give to your kids, they give back. That's not a crime, Julia. That's a family. You didn't give to me, I said. That's the thing you keep skipping. When I was small, you gave me a roof and food, and I'm grateful for it, and I paid it back many times over before I was 30. But somewhere along the way it stopped being a childhood and started being a debt, and you kept adding to the balance and calling it love. A real parent doesn't send a daughter an invoice for existing. I looked at him. You didn't take care of each other. You took care of yourselves with my money, and you told everyone you did it alone. You both let them believe I abandoned you, while I was paying for the tent you stood under. My mother flinched at that. She hadn't known I'd heard it. I watched her realize how much I'd heard. Over how many years, standing quietly at the edges of rooms while they built a version of me out of my own silence. I stood up and walked to the door and opened it, and the cold came in. I spent my whole life, I said, trying to figure out how much I'd have to make before you'd love me. I thought if I just hit the right number, you'd finally... I stopped. I didn't need to finish the old sentence. I had a new one. I finally know the answer. There is no number. It was never going to be a number, so I'm going to stop trying to find it. My father stood in the doorway on his way out and made one last attempt, and it was the most honest thing he said all morning, which is why it was the cruelest. We're your parents, he said. You owe us. I owed you a daughter, I said. You had one, for 33 years. You just never wanted her. You wanted what she could pay for. I'm keeping her now. Claire was behind me. Where does it hurt? The woman who'd asked me that stood at my shoulder while I watched the two people who never had walk down the steps and out to a car I no longer paid for, and I closed the door. That was the end of December 2025. I have not spoken to them directly since. They text sometimes. The messages are always the same underneath, no matter the words on top. There's a health scare presented like an emergency, then shaped into a request. There's a birthday remembered, suspiciously, right around the 1st of a month. There was one long message in the spring that came the closest to an apology. My father, of all people, that said he was sorry things got to where they got, and that the house was hard to keep without my transfers, and that surely I didn't want to see them lose it. Sorry, and the house, in the same breath. Even his remorse had a mortgage attached. I read it. I put the phone face down on my kitchen table. My own table now, in my own apartment, smaller than the life I used to fund, and about 1,000 times more mine. And I didn't answer. For a long time, my phone had run my life. The 11 p.m. client, the 15th of the month call, the buzz that meant someone needed something, all of it used to run me. Now it's just a phone. It lies there, and it can want things, and I get to decide whether to pick it up. That small freedom, the freedom to let a thing ring, is worth more than every dollar I ever transferred. My life now is quiet in a way I used to think was for other people. I still work in advisory at the boutique firm Catherine introduced me to, where I'm home for dinner and no one has ever once called my body a machine. I make less, I have more. Those turned out not to be a contradiction. I go to physical therapy, and my left hand does everything now except a few small things it does slowly, and I've made peace with the slowness. It's a reminder, and I've decided it's a kind one. It says, you were almost gone, and you came back to a life you chose. I see a therapist on Thursdays. She taught me that no is a complete sentence, which sounded like a slogan until I actually used it and felt the ground hold. I cook now badly for Claire, who eats it anyway and calls that care. Catherine and I have lunch once a month, and she tells me every time that I priced myself correctly at last, and every time I believe her a little more. The blood pressure that nearly killed me is boring now. Just numbers on a screen in a range my doctor likes. I earned that the hard way, by finally spending my time on the person the money was supposed to keep alive, which was always only me. I heard, through the same acquaintance who once gave up Claire's address, that my parents sold the house by late spring, downsized to something smaller in a neighborhood without a gate. I waited to feel something about it, guilt maybe, or the old, reflexive urge to fix it, to write a check, to walk back into my cage and pull the door shut behind me. It didn't come. What came instead was a strange, level clarity. The image around that house had never been real. It had been a set, and I had been paying to keep the lights on, and now the play was over, and the actors had to go live somewhere real. That wasn't cruelty. That was just what happens when the money stops pretending to be love. Sometimes I think about the hospital room, the cold foot of the bed where my mother stopped, the folder of bills on the meal tray, the sentence about the mortgage, the hallway light under the door. And then I think about the nurse with the ring on the chain who asked me where it hurt, and about Claire in the kitchen doorway, and about the ordinary Tuesday I now get to survive, and I understand that the stroke cost me, but it also cleared the table. It set the heavy card down for the last time and let it be declined, so I could finally see what was left when the money stopped talking. What was left was me. It turned out to be enough. It always had been. I was just paying too much to hear someone else say so. If you're listening to this and some part of it felt like your own house, if you've ever been the one who was needed instead of loved, who was told you were selfish for finally keeping something for yourself, I hope you know that stopping is not the same as cruelty, and a boundary is not a betrayal. You're allowed to be a person and not a function. Tell me about the moment you started to understand that. Sometimes naming it is the first quiet call that changes everything. I survived the stroke, but the thing that actually saved me was the day I stopped trying to buy love from people who only knew how to price me. I don't need their number anymore. I have my own.